I hope that you all heard Katrina's truth lesson last week about the origins and the ancient wisdom of unity and our co-founders. Our co-founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, were on the cutting edge of their search for truth, as most of us are. They explored all the great spiritual paths like Hinduism and Buddhism and Sufism and Judaism and Christianity. And this is why they diverged from the prevailing fundamental Christianity of the time. And they didn't take the Bible literally. Like in many esoteric schools, the Fillmores read the Bible metaphysically. They understood the allegorical level of the stories. They taught that every biblical character and place, an object, was a part of our psyches. And in that way, the Bible and all true spiritual teachings present us with a total blueprint for enlightenment, or as we call it in the West, a blueprint for manifesting the kingdom of heaven on earth. The universal truths that the Fillmores taught were the connecting links between all true spiritual paths. That was phenomenal when you think about it. Primarily, ethical behavior, love, forgiveness, and compassion. And this includes love, forgiveness, and compassion for yourself. These are the common themes, of course, for every truth lesson at Unity. They are practical spirituality, ways to live on a higher plane of life so that we avoid self-created suffering and thus manifest peace and joy and love and abundance in our lives. The deepest parts of these ancient truths, of course, is how to achieve them. It's not always easy to love and be peaceful and be joyful. I remember, and I'm sure many of you do too, when I was a young girl, maybe in the 2nd and 3rd grade, 4th grade, as an Episcopalian, I would go to Bible school and I'd hear the priest in the church service, and they would always say to be good and to love everyone. God is love. I agreed with that idea, and as a 3rd grader, sometimes though, if some bully at school was mean to me, I just couldn't love him or her. So I felt guilty, like I wasn't a good Christian. I felt like something was wrong with me because I couldn't love them. Why couldn't I love these bullies? Little did I know then that we're all programmed that way. It's part of our survival instinct from hundreds of thousands of years ago. It's why we're here today. It's why you all are sitting out there in those seats, and not the Cro-Magnon, the descendants of the Cro-Magnon man that our great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather killed when he attacked. By the survival of the fittest laws, we are the ones who survived. We're the descendants of those people because of our ancestors' survival instincts. They were better than the survival instincts of those who didn't get to kill them. But right now, at this point in time, everything has changed. And this very survival instinct in us, left over from hundreds of thousands of years ago, now works against us in the way the world is right now. Think about this. This is a really, really deep idea. We live in a global village where we're all so closely connected right now that the old survival instincts of one misguided narcissistic leader in one little country with nuclear capabilities can annihilate everyone. This old fight or flight instinct of ours only had a split second to react to a tiger or some neighboring tribesman who was attacking. They didn't have time to think about it. A split second, they had to act. And your ancestor is the one who did it the fastest. It was very useful then. But now, this very consciousness is working against us. We still make split-second decisions, non-reflective judgments about others and about ourselves, and often we're wrong. The result is that we create a lot of problems for ourselves and everyone else. Bottom line, our old survival techniques that served us well hundreds of thousands of years ago are now as useless as fins in our genetic makeup. But we are still operating in that consciousness. Think about it. Everything else physically has evolved, but not our consciousness. Our fins disappeared with physical evolution, but our old consciousness did not. It is now up to us, not some random survival of the fittest mutation rule, but it's up to us to transform our own consciousness. And it's getting urgent, too, because our survival depends on it. The negative, separatist, egoic consciousness makes us unhappy and sick, and it risks the survival of our planet. So, what do we do with these teachings about love and forgiveness and compassion, etc.? The end product of a sincere and committed spiritual practice is to develop what we in the West call Christ consciousness or enlightenment, as it's called in the East. It means learning to manifest the kingdom of heaven on earth. This means that you can be happy, peaceful, and loving all the time, no matter what is happening out there or what anyone is doing to you. Even if you do have bullies in your life, you don't need to suffer because of them. All spiritual masters have taught us that this is possible. This doesn't have anything to do, of course, with defending yourself if somebody attacks you with a gun or something. We're not even getting into that. We're talking about the 99 and 9/10% of the time when we perceive that someone's attacking us and we suffer because of it needlessly. So the question is, how do we do it? Manifest this kingdom on earth in which we are peaceful and happy all the time, 24/7, no matter what. First, we need to know what the kingdom of heaven is. I like to think, and this is kind of my own thing, but I think of the spiritual ladder as having 10 steps. And based on everything I've ever studied in all other religions, they all seem to have the same first 3 steps. The first 3 steps we must climb are the foundation steps: basic morality, integrity, and goodness. Think the 10 Commandments in Christianity or the Eightfold Path in Buddhism. Basically, doing what's right. Don't cheat, steal, kill, etc. We usually learn those things when we're young. If we practice them, we go up 3 rungs of the spiritual ladder. They are the foundation of all spiritual teachings, the sine qua non, the without which nothing. We go no further until we have mastered those first 3 steps. We can't go to step 4 until we have. Now, these first 3 steps produce a good person who does the right thing. These people are rewarded in life because they don't create chaotic messes in their lives. In the East, they call this creating good karma for yourself. To me, the major point of fundamental Christianity, or the fundamental level of any religion, is to learn about and climb these first 3 steps of the spiritual ladder. But, as we know in unity, there are 7 more rungs to the spiritual ladder, rungs that, if climbed, can result in your creating heaven on earth for yourself. These steps enable you to go far beyond just avoiding the chaos in your life. These steps enable you to be happy and peaceful 24/7, no matter what is happening out there. And those 7 spiritual steps are what I'd like to start talking about today. Reverend Robert Brummett calls this birthing a greater reality. Most of you remember Reverend Brummett. Raise your hand if you remember Reverend Brummett. Oh, good. Some of you do. He taught at Unity Ministers at Unity Village for decades. It was once written in a book that he raised the psychological awareness of a whole generation of Unity ministers. He spent a month with us here in residence at Unity of New Orleans last winter, giving classes, truth lessons, and counseling. He is often the featured speaker at Unity conferences around the country, and he is a writer par excellence. My favorite book of his is Birthing a Greater Reality, which I've spoken about briefly before. Why do people love this book? Because Reverend Brummett does a masterful job of explaining how we can progress on the spiritual ladder from what I call step 3 to step 10, manifesting heaven on earth 24/7, no matter what's going on in your life. He guides us as a midwife might in giving birth to our Christ consciousness, which can rise above earthly problems. Reverend Brummett, like the Fillmores, is always on the cutting edge of spiritual self-development. He goes the whole 9 yards, the goal being heaven on earth or enlightenment. It's kind of like graduating from spiritual grade school and junior high and high school, where we learn to become good moral people. Then Brummett takes his ideas, take us through to college and graduate school. Brummett says that in traditional Christianity, the questions of who am I and where am I going are answered with some variation of, I'm the child of a God out there, and if I'm really good, then I will go to heaven after I die. Unity says that we're all a part of the divine and that we can manifest heaven on earth now in our lives. The problem is that due to our programming and our inner seeds and triggers, we often can't see the divine order of things. We don't see our divinity. We just maybe don't believe it. Practical spirituality tells us that to overcome this, we can practice certain techniques, like we do here at Unity: positive thinking, intentionality, affirmative affirmations, and visualization. These techniques help enormously, but Reverend Brummett says that this voyage sometimes can seem endless without other tools too. He suggests a quicker route to peace and joy if we're willing to take it. First, we need to truthfully answer the question, who am I? This I is often a bundle of habits and instincts that we're afraid to let go of. That's who we are. Because if we do let go of them, maybe we won't know how to be. Yet these habits make slaves of us and create a lot of suffering in our lives. They rob us of the richness of the possibilities of who we really are. Robert likens this situation of our preferring the security of our inner slavery over venturing into new territory to that of E.A. Abbott's book, Flatland, where everyone lives in a two-dimensional world, a world of only length and width. Nobody can imagine depth, but depth is very real. This depth is true spiritual understanding. Flatlanders need to think out of the box. They need to go beyond their limits, despite their urge to cling to old, familiar ways of seeing reality. It makes them feel secure and safe. But in reality, the opposite is true. It is restricting them. Our old ways of seeing things and other people and ourselves is to build fences between us and other people. And it's to hang on to our old sense of self, which is the ego's way of feeling apart from life, apart from others, and even apart from God. It may have helped an intellectually limited Cro-Magnon man, but this viewpoint causes us to live in a limited flatland world. It's as limiting as it would be if we still had our fins and trying to get around. Psychologists tell us our tendency is always to revert to the old and the familiar because we feel so secure. It's like that classic psychology book example of the young girl, she's been proposed to by the two men. The first is this nice, stable engineer who's in love with her, and the second man is a party boy drifter with a drinking problem. Statistics show that she's going to marry the alcoholic because he's like her father, and she knows how to act in that environment. We tend to choose the familiar in our thinking and our consciousness. And when it comes to spiritual growth and letting go of the old, familiar us and truly birthing a greater reality and changing, we're often afraid. It's unknown territory. Reverend Brummett says that to let go of the parts of us that are preventing our manifesting heaven on earth, we have to know who we are. We have to be present to watch ourselves. Who are we? We must face ourselves so that we know what to let go of. This means facing our shadow self. The parts of us we don't like, we don't approve of, and we really don't want to admit that we have them, even to ourselves, our shadow self. But if we don't face our shadow self, we'll remain stuck with those parts of us. And they'll just jump out and cause us chaos and suffering at times we don't expect. But facing our shadow self isn't always pleasant at first. It feels shameful at times. But the only way to tame the shadow self is to face the dragon. Brummett says it's all about gaining our freedom from what we think is ourselves. That shadow self really isn't you at all. He says that we must realize that we are underneath all that we don't like, that we think is us. There's this beautiful, perfect, divine creature. It's an unimaginable level of life for many people. It's the three-dimensional world to a flatlander. We must rid ourselves of all the obstacles that are preventing our natural state, who we really are, which is divine. To get us started on this path of birthing a greater reality, Reverend Brummett talks about the difference between the experiences of translation, a translation experience, and a transformation experience. He says translation is what happens when we have a powerful experience or some penetrating spiritual insight, but then we go right back to living our lives the way we always have. Then there's transformation. This is when our lives are totally transformed because of the experience. We are like the butterfly that leaves the chrysalis. We can no longer live our lives as a caterpillar. We no longer accept just grubbing around in this two-dimensional world. We soar away. Brummett says that translation has its place. Maybe we encounter a powerful spiritual teaching and we get inspired. Maybe it makes us reflect for a while on our lives, and this is good. But true transformation means death to the ego, or an aspect of the ego. Maybe the part of us that judges or doesn't forgive. Letting the ego die is what St. Paul meant when he said that we must die daily. Anybody else ever wonder what that meant like I used to? We must die daily. What in the world does that mean? We must die daily to the parts of us that no longer serve who we want to become. Our ego is who we think we are, our sense of self-identity, and we don't give it up easily. It's all that programming and false personality. It separates us from others and the world, and it makes us suffer and makes us feel alienated. We feel fear and jealousy and negativity because of it. Ego believes in separateness. Brummett says that the other out there that we dislike is actually our projection of what we don't like in ourselves. It is our shadow self projected outward onto someone else. That principle, by the way, is the underlying theme of A Course in Miracles. Translating is like changing our clothes, he says. Transforming is becoming a whole new person, like the butterfly who left its two-dimensional caterpillar chrysalis. It's free of negative emotions and fears and feelings of alienation. We fly above many of life's problems that way. Like any birth process, it's messy at first. We might get confused and disoriented, like when we first quit blaming the world and others for our problems and face our own inner negativity that we're projecting. That's messy stuff. It feels horrible. But in the long run, we birth a much greater reality for ourselves. Why? Because we can deal with a world that we create. If we're creating all that, we can fix it. Maybe we have to face our own anger or negativity or selfishness, but this is okay. It's part of our growth, facing our shadow self. We all have one because we're all human beings. Pregnancy is rarely easy. And birthing a greater reality is no exception. Reverend Brummett says that about 100,000 years ago, the human species started evolving more in terms of consciousness than evolving physically. Think about that. Physical evolution went on for millions of years, but 100,000 years ago, we quit evolving physically so much. But we started evolving in consciousness. But about 200 years ago, another profound shift occurred. A few individuals began to see that we are responsible for our own evolution. It isn't going to happen by natural selection. Right now, he says that we are at another critical point in human history, the evolution of our own consciousness that only we can do. Parenthetically, Brummett says that many of us are very, very ready for someone else's consciousness to be transformed, and we may have been waiting for a very long time for theirs to change, but it just doesn't work that way. We can only change ourselves. He says that we need to look at the illusions that keep us asleep and addicted to conflict and suffering. Just as we take our temperatures to see if our body is ill during Corona time, we must look at our suffering and all the conflicts we have to get clues about our spiritual temperatures so that we can then heal ourselves. To get healed, we must be willing to do the vital work of personal awakening. Others can rub the raw spots of our psyches and make us aware then of our need for healing. Focusing on the faults of others is a common way to avoid looking at our unhealed wounds. But our personal healing is dependent on our compassionately accepting what is there in us. It's okay. It doesn't matter what we see. Everyone is dealing with these things if they're really honest with themselves. It's okay not to be perfect. We aren't bad people just because we aren't Jesus Christ or Buddha or Krishna. We just need to cut the umbilical cord to our ego. As we do this healing, we set the stage for global transformation. We are all related in profound and mysterious ways. Brummett says that personal healing, which will lead to global healing, depends on our willingness to look at and compassionately accept what we see, what is there, even though we don't like it sometimes. He uses birthing as his metaphor for this process of transformation because he says it parallels the process of giving birth in so many ways. It has a life cycle and a timetable of its own. It requires preparation and cooperation, or else great suffering can result. Birthing is almost always painful, but our degree of understanding and our cooperation with the process can minimize that pain. And birthing is typically a joyful event. It results in a brand new life, yours, a life that is not ours, yet very much a part of us, like a baby. And as with birthing babies, there's a new joy and love that the parents never knew was possible before. Reverend Brummett, as many of you know, was a physics and math professor. He's very grounded in science. And as a science person and a unity minister, he states that mankind has gone about as far as we can go without a major change in consciousness. We simply must give birth to a new reality in us in order to create this new reality in us and in the world. If we don't, we risk destroying everything. Remember the story about the Indian farmer I told a few weeks ago who entered his prize-winning blue ribbon wheat in a competition every year? He shared his grain seeds with the neighbors, his competition, and when the reporter asked him why he would share his prize seeds with his competition, he said, "If I don't, their wheat will cross-pollinate with mine when the wind blows, and mine won't be any good either." And that's why we, as a human race, need so desperately to evolve in consciousness and realize that we are all in this thing together, cross-pollinating each other constantly. We simply must give birth to a greater reality and consciousness so that we can stop all this suffering for us personally and in the whole world. We spend fortunes fighting personal and foreign wars. Egos on a personal scale become egos on a national scale, and the global village is just too small for us not to all get along. And the only way to start the process of an evolution in consciousness is within ourselves. Brummett says this is our only chance of survival as individuals and as humanity. I'm presuming that most of you, all of you actually here, have gone up the first 3 steps of the spiritual ladder. You wouldn't be here if you hadn't. You are good people. I know that. So now you deserve to go up some higher steps and shed all the parts of you that are keeping you from being the joyful, peaceful, abundant people that you deserve to be 24/7, no matter what is happening in your external life. It is possible, and you deserve it. Stay tuned in as we delve even deeper into this graduate school level of the spiritual path.